Beverly Asante Puschmann. What a pleasure talking with Beverly. Ace the Half is her book. It's about running. Is there really such thing as the runner's high? I've done a decent amount of running in my life, and I don't know if I've ever experienced it. She has a very interesting answer to that, but she ran in college at collegiate level, track and field, and then she stopped for a long time, then revisited it through friends, and now has a passion for running. We talk about the technology. We talk about the shoes. The shoes have come such a long way. One of the great pieces of advice she has is, if you're going to start running, don't go to kind of a big box store. Go to a runner store and actually get looked at, because the way you run plays a big role on what equipment you should have. But the technology, heel striking, we talk about heel striking. Where is running right now? Can you run a 5K? Can you run a 10K? Can you run a half marathon? It was a very, very interesting conversation with Beverly. Her view on discipline is a unique one, and she couples it with something that I've never heard before. I've never heard this take on discipline, where she is now in her stage of her life as a mother, as a wife, as a runner, as a coach. She works for a very big tech firm, but she still does all this running. It's her passion. You're going to enjoy this conversation with Beverly. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family, in their passion, in their careers, and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. It's a question. Beverly Asante Puschmann, thank you so much for your time today. Is the runner's high a real thing?
That's a good question. I think it is. I think it is. So, yeah, when I've been on long runs afterwards, you do feel really great. I mean, that's the one thing I say. I go running because it makes me feel really, really good. So, yeah,
Mm.
I definitely say it is.
And is there a certain point in the run where you start to feel it?
Well, so I would say it's more of a thing that I feel after the run and less of a thing
Post.
that I feel like during the run. Because towards the end of a long run, you're kind of like pushing yourself and you like just want to get there. So yeah, I mean, sometimes you go for a long leisurely run, but I'd say it's particularly afterwards that I feel really good.
Mm. And you were introduced to, I mean, you were an athlete. You're a Blue Devil. You went to
Yeah,
Duke, and
yeah.
uh, you didn't. It seems to me you didn't get into running because you had to. You just kind of loved it. I think we have a big issue here, of course, in the country with obesity, overweight. People need to start exercising. Running would be a great avenue for that. But how did you get introduced, and why do you still do it?
Yeah, so actually, I mean, it's been a bit of a two-phase running phases for me in my life, right? I mean, I got into running, to be very honest with you. It was when I was very young, right? So
Mm,
I was always pretty fast when I was a kid, and I was a really really small kid. I was like, a head smaller than everyone else.
mm.
So anyway, but it was one of those things where I was just incredibly fast. Like people kind of tap me on their back on the playground, and so I'd chase them, to see if they could get away from me. So the boys would be like doing this, and I started in
Hmm.
3rd grade. I ran my first race, and then the teacher, announced this race, and I ran my race. And I'd been, kind of training, because I'd always be like trying to get to the front when we're running around this field. And then at the race, I actually like won this race. It was the first race I ever won. And I remember the next year up, the teacher said, we're gonna have another race. And I told her, I won the one last year. He said, well, you may not win this year. And I was like, what? I'm gonna have to like defend my time. So then I ran the race and I won again. So that's
Wow,
kind of
and this
like
is
what
girls and boys?
no, this is just girls
Just
category,
girls.
yeah.
I
So,
see, I see.
yeah, but in training, we actually would train with the boys. I mean, it was just like, we'd run around this field. She'd take us down this field and we'd run around it. And I'd
Mm.
always try to be there first. There was one boy I like just couldn't beat. He was just faster than I was. No matter what I did, I couldn't beat him. But out of the girls, I was the fastest. And so that's where the whole thing like kind of started. So I started running like cross country, and then later track and field, and did other sports as well. And I sort of did in high school. I was kind of like a long jumper, high jumper, and middle distance runner. So I did like 800, 1500, and 3000. I stopped the 3000 later. But then when I went off to college, the coach kind of looked at me and was like, wow, you're like really skinny. And she was like scared to put me in the 800-meter program. So she's like, I think the 400-meter program be good for you. So I became like a shorter distance sprinter. And it was like kind of cool. And but for me, I always like knew at that point in my life I didn't have enough discipline to like keep running after college. So the
Hmm.
minute I left college, like that was the end of it, and I stopped running. And and then I met my husband some years after college, and he said, Bev, he heard from all my colleagues that I'd been, or from my friends from college, that I'd been like this really like athletic person, right? He's like, yeah, why don't you start running again? And I was like, oh yeah, it's like kind of like never did it. And then in my mid 30s, it was actually something completely different that triggered it. We had this global challenger. It's called the Virgin Go Challenge now, and it's this step challenge to get office people moving. And I did this, and my colleagues that were on the team, like, they actually kind of drafted me into this team, and they made me the team lead. And they were
Wow.
all like 10 to 15 years older than I was, but they were all kind of like these pretty serious amateur athletes. Like, they were all marathon runners, half marathon runners, and cyclers. And so I was like, wow, I'm gonna have to like do something to get a lot of steps. And then I decided we were pretty quick, very high up on the rankings in the team in my company, and so we decided like we're gonna try and win this challenge. So I was like, wow, I'm gonna have to get some more steps. So I decided I'm gonna start running again, and so I declared to the team I'm gonna run a half marathon. But I was like, I didn't know where to start.
Mm.
So I had to like figure this out, and that's how the whole second phase of running, like, this is like 13 years after I'd been out of college, and that was like in my mid 30s, and so that was like almost 10 years ago now.
Mm.
So yeah, yeah.
Very, very cool. And now you've written books, you're coaching it, and let's talk about. So, I played soccer all my life, and
Mhm.
poor coaching would tell us, when you're punished, you got to run.
Oh yeah.
So many of us at that age kind of, oh, I got to run. That means it's punishment. So we would
Mhm.
dread it. It's a terrible way to do it. It's a wrong way.
Yeah.
But when you run, talk to me about, the technology, the shoes they have now, those thick foamed running shoes talk about that, and also the heel strike, about the technology and the style of run. How do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, that is a whole science of its own, right? So I'm certainly not an expert on that, but what I really recommend people when it comes to shoes is seriously find yourself a running store. Don't go to like a sports store or like a
Mm.
sports paraphernalia store. Like, really go to a running store, because there's so much technology and it changes, right? You're talking about like those thick soles, like the hookahs, right? There's like so many different kind of shoes, and every person's foot is very different, and
Hmm.
people, like, the way they pronate, like they move their feet, is different.
Wow.
And that needs to be looked at by someone who kind of has an idea of what they need to look for. And also, for some people, they have insoles in their shoes, and that's also very important that you take them along, because they need to go in the shoes when you're testing the shoes. And there's
Interesting.
like a whole world of knowledge around that topic, because that's also like a really important thing for people to stay safe and protect their limbs when they run, because running is a sport that you can get injured if you overdo it, or if you don't have the right equipment. So you do have to be a little bit careful, but it's also like the shoes can be a core foundation for being safe when you run, right?
I mean, shoes is really the only equipment in running, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of the sport. It's a pretty cheap sport, to be honest with you,
Mm,
because the
mm.
only real thing you need is like really, like you said, a pair of shoes, maybe a t-shirt and a pair of shorts, or if you live in a cold area, long pants and like a little light jacket. But you don't need a lot of equipment. It's beautiful because you can go running when you're on business trips. If you're training for a race. So my husband he used to travel a lot, and that was the one thing. He'd always pack running shoes, and then he'd love it. He'd take his Garmin and it would suggest a route, and he'd see, the city and or different places. And
Wow.
he just loved it. And it's a great way to stay fit when you're on the go, right? It works. I mean, even for people, it works for people to train sometimes at work because they have a gym where they can change. So they just get changed and go for a run over lunch, and it just clears your mind. It's great. No equipment needed.
How about the impact on your hips and joints?
Yeah, so I mean, that's also something that to a degree you can control a little bit with the shoes, depending on what kind of shoes you get. But yeah, I mean, the hips on your joints, so I won't lie, it's a sport that's it's a pretty high impact sport, right? Because you are
Right.
putting your full weight at a certain speed onto your hips and joints, and there are people for which that can be a bit of an issue, or particularly if they've had injuries in the past, they need to be careful. On the other hand, like let's say if somebody does want to train for a race, there are ways of, let's say, doing less running and still being able to train. Like you can cross train, for example, you can do part of your workouts on a bike, you can do
Mm.
parts of them on an elliptical runner, or like different ways. Like I have one athlete now that's been injured in the past, and that person does like one day of swimming and one day of trampolining as part of their workouts.
Wow. Yeah, when I lost a bunch of weight and I did some triathlons, and
Mm,
you're not gonna like this, but I would learn to I had a coach. I love to swim. I tolerated the bike, and then I just hated the run because it would kind of be in that order. It is in
mhm,
that order.
mhm,
So, the swim, you have all your energy. Your
mhm,
bike, you're going we did a Olympic triathlon, so it's about 25, 26 mile bike ride, a 1 mile swim, and then a 10K.
mhm.
But by the time we got to the run, I was pretty exhausted. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
kind of trudging through. Talk to me about heel strike and, like, where you land your foot. I sometimes I see runners as I'm driving by, they kind of look jarred all the time when they're running.
Yeah, I know. So it's interesting. I mean, there's people that are like front strikers, heel strikers, and mid strikers, and they say
Yeah.
like depending a little bit how you strike it, it can be a little bit less in terms of injury, right?
Mm,
So I mean, I think I believe that the mid strike is kind of the one that's least injury prone. But it's yeah, I see. It's actually interesting because running form is certainly something that is interesting to watch and to look at. And I know myself, like for some years I was carrying a phone when I was running, so sometimes I still run in like kind of an awkward way. And
ah,
it's really important that you do kind of watch how you run. And I know people have, like, for example, in the past tried to change the way they ran because they maybe had a way that was making them more at risk for injury.
hmm,
So yeah, I mean, the way you run can have an impact on how fast you go. It can have an impact on whether you get injured or not. So that's certainly something that you want to look at, or like maybe have someone make a little video and just have a look at how you're running. And because sometimes, for example, like a more ideal way is that your arms go forward and backwards, and there's a lot of
right.
people that cross over when they run. You also lose a lot of efficiency if you cross over like
Hmm.
that, right? So it's better to have your arms go like more back and forth and things like that. There's like some little things that you can kind of look at. But yeah, so that's definitely like something that you need to watch out for.
I remember a coach. I coached track, but I didn't coach any of the running. But for on in a high school, and I just remember one of the coaches would always say, for the runners, the long distance runners, act like you have potato chips in your fingers. Does this make any sense to you? I don't remember
Wow.
why. So,
I've
like, you're
never heard
holding a
that before.
potato chip so it wouldn't
Ah,
crash it.
uh-huh. Yeah, maybe not to make the fists. I mean, yeah, you want to be relaxed when you run. Maybe it's that the reference to that. I
Mm,
think probably if you're gonna run like that, it's gonna be very uptight, and you need to be like low shoulders, kind of
shoulders,
keep your
yes.
arms down. Yeah, maybe that was the reference. I'm not sure. I've never heard that. I mean, I ran track for a long time. Never had a coach tell me that.
Beverly, maybe I made it up. Maybe I just feel like
No,
eating
I'm
potato
sure you
chips.
didn't. I'm sure there
I
was
don't know.
some really good reference to
Maybe,
it, but I just never heard it.
maybe. Now you said you did the sign or the I shouldn't say science, the mentality of running a 400, which of course is just one full lap versus
Yeah.
an 800 versus running a 1600. I mean, they're so different. You've got to learn how to pace. You've got to learn. I mean, there's just different kind. And then the 100 meter, forget it. The big thighs and like just the body styles vary. I mean,
Yeah.
and there's jumping over hurdles sometimes. So it's still all essentially running though. Does it
Yeah, it's all
differ?
running. It's all like you said, it's all very, very different running. You know, you can go from like the 100-meter dash all the
Yeah.
way to like the ultra marathon and right, and you'll
Right.
find, like you said, very different physiques, right?
Right.
And so, you know, being a 400-meter sprinter, I sometimes tell the story and feel like, why'd you tell the story? I'm like, well, you know, we used to do a lot of weightlifting, right? So we were weightlifting about 3 times a week. And I was a very slight person. I mean, I was, you know, I'm about average size, but at that point, I weighed about 110 pounds. I was under
Wow.
110 pounds. I couldn't give blood. I know that because,
Wow.
and so I was very, very slender, right? And we used to lift these weights. And by the time I got to like junior year, senior year, like literally, it got to the point where when I put regular jeans on, I'd sit down and they just split. Like I
Wow.
couldn't fit into regular jeans anymore because my I'd put on so much muscle on my legs, you know, and I was a like I said, I was a slight person, you know, I wasn't big at all. So it was just like, and I remember one night I was in a friend's dormitory and she wanted to put a necklace on and she puts this necklace on and realizes it doesn't fit around her neck anymore. You
Wow.
know, and so yeah, the physiques are very different. You know, the longer distance that people run, the sort of the more slender they tend to be, not as muscular because you don't need as much muscle power. But I also sometimes wonder whether that's changed. You know, I wonder whether they're still weightlifting as much and
Mm.
doing that much. But yeah, you do run the longer distances and stuff like that. That also then kind of need a lighter body to do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, these days golfers weightlift. I mean, everybody
Yeah,
weightlifts, you know? It's just that just having muscles is important. But just the mentality, you know, when I would talk to the sprinters or the runners that were doing the 400 versus the 800 was specifically like pretty grueling, right? Because that
yeah.
first 400 you're pacing and you know, you get to 6 and then you start, you know, building and building and building and you know, these it seems like some of these runners just kind of have one gear and it's just very fast. And it it's is running for everybody, Beverly?
Well, you know, so I'd say most people can run, right? So there's going to be people for which running is not the right sport, and you know that's also like, you know, maybe some people the doctors told them like don't run, it's just
Mm,
not for you. You know, I don't know, maybe you've had an injury or maybe it's just really not the right thing for you. But I, you know, my my thoughts on this are that most people can run, right? And you know,
right.
most people, a lot of people, not most people, but some people will say like, I could, you know, never run a half marathon, and you know, and I always think, well, you probably could because, but I think maybe your idea of training for half marathon is different than what it needs to be, right?
Mm,
So you know, when people say I can't run, like I talked to one runner, and he said, you know, when I started running, I couldn't even run to the nearest lamppost outside my house, right? Like literally, he couldn't run that far. And he said he just started with baby steps. And that's what I always tell people. Like, if you want to build up to run a half marathon, like you could literally start with running 60 seconds at a time. Like, you
mm,
don't need to start with running 10K at a time. You know, like you start slow, right? And like you start wherever your level starts you off. And, you know, I think really, I mean, there's people that tell me, like, Bev, I just really don't enjoy running. And I always ask them, well, you know, how fast do you run when you go running? Because that's kind of one thing that people do is that they'll go out really, really fast and think they
mm,
have to sustain this really long, fast pace. And I'm like, well, you know, running, you should be able to hold a conversation when you run. Like, you shouldn't be like huffing and puffing, right?
right.
And so, and that's also, I think, where people get different ideas about whether they can or can't run, right?
Hmm. Talk to me about breathing when you're running. Is it all nose, in through the nose, out through the mouth?
That's a good question. There's different theories on this.
Yeah.
You know, that's one thing that, um, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have. I can't give you a lot of information on that. I've spent a little bit of time thinking about it. I sometimes watch like what I do, but I've not really played that much with the breathing. Um, yeah, no, I don't really do too much with the breathing. I'm kind of neutral on that one.
That's why, because
Yeah.
when you said you have to have a conversation when you're running, I'm
Ah,
thinking, you know, there are points, you know, I would try last time when I was training and I would, you know, I'd go for a mile and a half jog. And then, you know, I don't know, so interval when I felt like my kind of heartbeat was kind of steadying out, plateauing, I would sprint and then
Mhm.
slow down just to kind of, change my, my heartbeat a little bit. And I ended up being breathing too much through my mouth, or, uh, through my nose. I just always wondered how that is. But to go for a half marathon, do you recommend that kind of sprinting while running?
Right. So yeah, I mean, there's different levels that people start at, but like, let's say if somebody has like a basis of running and has been running maybe like 5Ks, 10Ks, then the beginning part of your half marathon running preparation could actually be doing like hill sprints, for example,
Mm,
where you might do like depending efforts could be anywhere from like, you know, like a half a minute to like a minute, minute and a half, right? Going uphill. So that would be like one way of building strength in your muscles as well. And yeah, so if you were doing that type of workout, then for that, at the end of that 1.5 minutes or half a minute, like you'd be huffing and puffing like pretty big.
mm,
So yeah, that's definitely the type of training that you might also do. If you were like a complete novice, then like that might not be part of your training plan. It really depends which training plan you pick up. But yeah, I mean, definitely hill sprints or like, also intervals later, the shorter and longer intervals. And there you would be breathing in a much more heavy way. But probably about I'd say I think about 80% of your training when you're preparing for half marathon will be at an easy pace, a conversational pace. So you should be able to have a conversation with somebody
mm.
like if you're running with a buddy or so. So you'd be going at an easy pace. But yeah, I mean, you do some faster interval work later, and as you build up in strength and also speed.
And with all the technology now, like you said, you were carrying your phone, and it can detect. You put the, I've got a watch that it measures my pulse, and you put the app on. It told me exactly where I ran and how fast I was going. I mean, all of that is just so. It almost gamifies it a little bit. How far fast did you run? And it's just so inviting.
Yeah, I mean, some people love that, and other people like, I don't want to have any of that.
Oh,
So there are
interesting.
definitely people out there who just like, I just want to go for a run and enjoy nature. That's perfectly fine too. There's
Hmm.
absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'll admit, I'm a bit of a sort of gadget person.
Yeah.
I love technology. I love gadgets. I have a degree in computer science, so gadgets are great for me. And I just have a new Garmin from this year because I upgraded after 4 years. It was quite old, but it's just I love to look at my stats at the end of the run and just look at the different things like how did it go? What was my pulse? What was my power? What was like my speed and distance and all that kind of stuff. For some people, that's stressful, or they might just want to look at one metric and when I train, I try to train at a pretty specific intensity or with purpose. And so I do look down at my watch, quite frequently. And I know other people just don't like to do that. That's fine
Hmm.
too. I mean, you need to find your style, right? And I even have a footbot that measures my running power, and that's just me. But it's fine. You don't need to do all that. And there's people that love to look at even more analytics after their run, and it's fine. I mean, and it's like I like to run with my phone because sometimes I just like to listen to music, and there's people who are like total purists. They're like, I'm not going to listen to any music. That's fine too. That was me when I was training, back then. And now I'm just like, well, I do this for fun, so listening to some music is okay. But everyone has their own style, and I think everyone just needs to decide what works for them.
Yeah, just get out there. And like I kind of started saying in the beginning was, with the issue of obesity in this country, just more exercise. If it's going to be running, that's fine. If it's going to be anything, just get out there and do what it takes. And that was my next question with music. I mean, by the way, I've got the same watch you do, the same manufacturer, and it can tell swimming. It tells me distance in golf. It tells me
Yeah,
where I run. I mean, it tells me how well I sleep and
yeah,
REM. I mean, my goodness, it's just this is the Internet of Things.
yeah, absolutely.
It's absolutely wonderful. And so you take a sabbatical uh, from work. You're at a big one of the big tech companies,
Mhm.
and halfway through it, you decide to write a book, and then you start cramming, and then you finish the book. And tell us about that process.
Yeah, it's actually really funny. I mean, the idea was in my head already for so many years, not necessarily the topic, but when I was like 6 years old, I went to bed one night and I told my mom, I was like, mom, I'm gonna write a book one day. You know? And that idea has always been in me, right? And so when I went to primary school, like I'll tell you, I just was not good in, well, I went to school in German first and then in English, but English and German or sort of any like not
Mm.
non-foreign language was not good for me. I was not good at reading and writing, really not. And so I'm on this sabbatical and I had made myself a long list of all these things I want to do, and actually writing a book I don't even think was on the list, but I decided like halfway through, I was like, wait a moment, I've been wanting to do this and I have some time now. So let me just, find out how to do this. So I went online, picked up a couple resources, bought myself a course, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna like try this, right? So I started drafting out the book, and I made the outline. I started writing. So I had like a a very very rough first draft by the time after about a month. So but around the time when I went back to work, and then I was very very busy that summer because I was training for another race and I was sort of writing at the same time. My son was still quite young, and my husband was traveling away abroad for 3 months almost straight, in 3 months straight.
Wow.
So I started like not being able to balance everything anymore. So at some point the book just kind of fell off the buggy, right?
Mm.
And then I went to a conference and I got really inspired, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna like start writing again. So it was like 2 years later in 2019. In December, I picked up the book again. And then actually, it was around that time that I had a friend who'd asked me already once. It's like, if I needed a content editor. And I thought to myself, first time I said no, because honestly, I didn't even know what a content editor was.
Mm.
So I felt embarrassed to ask. And the second time she asked me, I kind of thought, well, let me just like ask her what a content editor does, because maybe I do need one. And then she said, she explained it to me and said, oh, let's have lunch, and like you can send me your book, I'll read it, and then I'll let you know if we can work together. And so we had this conversation, and then she got involved, and then I also just realized like what she was going to be able to make magic out of my book, right?
Hmm.
And so what I'd written, because what I'd written was pretty basic, right? And then we worked together, and then by 2021, now in May, we published the book. So yeah.
Very, very cool. And so now you're a published author. You actually coach people in running, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't have like, because I do this on the side, right? So I don't take on like a ton of a ton of
Right.
clients, but yeah, I do coach a little, but I also just spend a lot of time talking to runners and helping them out like in a kind of more informal way, not necessarily as directly as clients. But
So I took your quiz, and on your site, and so I am stage 2B boomerang.
yeah.
Tell us what that is.
Okay, so a stage 2B boomerang is somebody that used to run and is coming back to running. So maybe you've not been running as much lately. Is that possible?
Yes, that's very possible.
Yeah, so that would be somebody like, that would have been myself when I started in my mid 30s, somebody that did some running back in the day, and little or a lot, and then coming back to running after a break. So yeah, and that's kind of, I think, one of the challenges I think that I described at this stage is that, sometimes, for example, when I started up again, I still had like my equipment from back in the day,
Right.
13 years ago. So you kind of like get in the equipment, get the shoes out, and it's a really bad idea, but and that's like one of the things you kind of got to watch out for if you're a kind of returning runner, because the clothing, you're probably okay, it might not be the most modern, might not be the best, wicking effects, but you're probably going to be okay. The shoes, I would really recommend that you like go back to the store and get a new set, because also the foam degrades over time. So even if it's a couple years, like it's probably better to start on new shoes. But yeah, and then of course there's also like a lot of, sometimes also some like emotion that comes up from either you've been, for example, for me, having been a sprinter, when I started going out, I would run really fast and I'd be
Mm.
completely out of breath. And then I was talking to my husband, and he'd done a lot of distance running. He goes, Bev, I think you're running too fast.
Hmm.
And I was like, I wonder. And so like I started working out like, okay, how fast should I be running? And like learned about the training zones. I was like, wow, okay. Because when you're training on a team, like the coach tells you how fast to go from here to here, and you never
That's right.
think about anything like that, right? But when you're training on your own, you got to think about, how fast do I run? Like how far am I going to run? Like you got to think about all these things, right? Yeah.
Very interesting, because I have a friend who just picked up running, and they got some of those that foam shoe, and they just
Mm.
it's like running on pillows. It's on,
Mhm.
it's the technology has just changed so much.
Yeah.
And do you see yourself, are you training for a half marathon right now?
Yeah, I am training for one right now. So, I was gonna run one in 2 weeks, but I have to admit I had to take my training back a little, so I'll do a 10K in 2 weeks, and then I'll do a half marathon in about a month, 1 month and a half, yeah, so
And have you ever done a full?
no, I never have, and I probably won't for the next couple of years just because my son is still pretty young and I like to spend
Mm,
time with the family. It's a very large time commitment is my impression. So I like the half marathon because it's very doable. It's also the recovery time afterwards is not as long, and I
mm.
just feel like it's also a distance that's, manageable for me time-wise to train for. So
And how long do you have to train ahead of time for a half marathon?
yeah, it really depends where you pick up. If you've kind of been running a little bit, maybe you've done a 5K or you can run about half an hour at a time, then you're probably okay to train for about 12 to 16 weeks, depending on how much you kind of what your mileage is at the
Uh-huh.
moment. And then if you're, let's say, starting from completely off the couch, then you'd want to add something like, couch to 5K program or like the run your butt off program, not run your butt off plan from Runner's World, for example. Those are like 9 to 12 weeks, so you'd want to add that in front. And you might want to give yourself a little bit of transition time in between, so run some extra miles. But so you'd be around if you're completely coming off the couch, probably like let's say 16 plus let's say 12 to put on the safe side. So around 28 weeks. And if you were running a little bit, 16 to 12 to 16 weeks.
And the regimen each week is it how often? What
Yeah,
is
so
the
it really depends what plan you pick up. I mean, you can find plans. So I've seen plans that like you could probably do I'd say probably 3 is the least, but, you'd expect to run between 4 to 5 times a week,
mm.
would be my guess. I think that if you're starting off in the beginning with a couch to 5K, you'll be running about 3 times a week, but, for a half marathon, to spread the mileage, you'll probably be running 4 to 5 times a week. That'd be sort of a low volume plans, maybe 4, and a higher volume plan about 5.
And you plan on continuing to do this well until you can't anymore. You love it.
Yeah, so I've been super lucky. I have to say, I've really suffered very, very few running injuries. For all the time I've been running. I mean, knock on wood. I've been lucky. So I plan to keep running for as long as I can. It makes me feel so good. It's one of those things where I also feel like my brain ticks at like the best speed and the best creativity level when I'm running. So I always
Really?
say, as long as I can run, I'm going to run, and otherwise, I'm going to switch to I don't know, cycling or swimming or something. But yeah, it's great.
Talk about that, your creativity level. You think of things when you're running?
Well, it's interesting. It kind of gives you perspective. And like I sometimes I don't really have the capacity to think when I'm running. I mean, especially when I'm doing like the faster workouts, but sometimes like on a long run, I also try to think up, what am I gonna write as in my newsletter this week? Or,
Mm,
I get like ideas and I start you have time to think because if you're running like at a leisurely pace, it's a good time. It's also time that you have for yourself. I mean, that's a little bit less of a problem as the kids get older. My son is 11 now, but when my son was very young, it was also just a nice thing to do for myself, and I had this
mm.
time to like just think and be on my own. But yeah, you get creative and you kind of have time to think because you're out there for quite a while, right?
Yeah, yeah. I have one friend who doesn't like to run because he says it gives me too much time to think.
Hmm.
So he needs something that takes up, but I have others that just say I love it. They come up with ideas. They're just kind of alone. They turn the ringer off on their phone,
Hmm.
and they're kind of off the grid. And so I lost a lot of weight, as I mentioned before, and people always ask me how I did it. And so I always say discipline. I got focused. I had discipline. I do it. I wonder, does discipline, how it plays a role in your life in running and writing the book and your profession?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, discipline is super important, I think, in my life as well. And I always say sometimes I have too much and sometimes too little, right?
Mm,
I mean, there's one thing for me is so when I really want to do something, I like I think I can become over disciplined, right? So I always say
Mm,
I do it at all costs, and that's a little bit the risk. So sometimes I'm a little bit scared to really engage because I'm like, I'm going to pull this through no matter what. And so, yeah, no, discipline, but, to get stuff done. And especially like if you have a busy life, I'm one of these people. I work 100%. I have a family, I have hobbies. So you've got to balance stuff. And like, so you have to be disciplined. And, I also say with my running, it's like, if you just decide not to train for 2 weeks, well, it's hard to make progress towards your race, then you can't
right.
move the race. So yeah, and also with work, you've got to schedule everything in and you've got to get all done. It takes a lot of discipline to also, and easiest is also just if you have routines and follow routines, right? That's also kind of a part of discipline. And interesting enough, that's something that I learned as a mother because I had never in my life thought of like what a routine is or having a routine. And I remember when my son was maybe just a couple weeks old, my mother-in-law, who's really brilliant, was helping me with the baby, and she said, Beverly, I really think you need a routine. And I thought to myself, a routine? I was like, no way, like I'm not that kind of person.
Hmm.
And as I started building these routines, things became a lot easier, and it's also a lot easier to for me to be disciplined when I do things in one order and kind of have a
Mm.
similar order. And there is actually one thing with running that can throw me off every half year, and that is that my routine changes between winter and summer because of the daylight savings and also because of the temperature. So, like,
Hmm.
a lot of times in the winter, I'll go running over lunch because that's the most pleasant temperature. And running in the morning or evening is a bit trickier because it's dark. But then in the summer, I don't want to go running over lunch because it's really hot. So,
Right.
I go running in the morning, try to go running in the morning. So the routine kind of changes. And that's one thing where you have to be super disciplined, and where I also always have to tell myself ahead of time, okay, this change is
Hmm.
coming up. You got to be ready for this. You also got to change your clothing when you go running at different times of day and just preparing yourself for that.
It's fascinating to me that you equate discipline with routine. I've never heard that angle before, Beverly. That's very interesting because once you're set, there's a one book, Atomic Habits, and they say kind of couple something to create. For me, it's easier to start a routine than
Mhm.
it is to kind of break one. So, like I wanted to floss more, so I say, okay, I'm going to start flossing after I brush my teeth every time. So when you kind of
Mhm.
couple it together, it's easier to
Yeah.
reproduce. Uh, Very interesting angle. When you do your half marathons, do you have a time that you want to beat each time?
Yeah, so normally as I get towards the end of the training and it's clear about where I stand with the training, I'll definitely set myself a time. And it's actually interesting. I also wrote this in my book because I remember the first time when I was preparing for half marathon, I ran a 10K before the half marathon, and I told my husband, "It's like, okay." So he's like, "Well, what time are you going to run on the 10K?" And I was like, "It's going to be like I'm going to try and do an hour, right?" And he was so excited that he told these
Uh oh.
friends that we were going to visit that weekend, and he told a couple other friends, and then I went to the race and I completely fell apart on the race. I mean, probably everything that could have gone wrong just went wrong. Like my watch didn't work. I started way too fast. And so anyway, I fall apart. I did like 101. So like it wasn't even that bad of a time. But then somebody made a comment that I thought was really discouraging. And I was like, okay, so from now on, I'm not going to tell anyone my real time, what I want to get. So I'll always have like two times. I'll have one that I tell people that I think I can make, and one that I tell my husband that he promises me not to tell anyone, and then we go with that. Because then he holds me accountable for that time, but at the same time, I don't have to come back embarrassed if I completely mess up the race.
Oh, I'm sure he felt terrible about that. That's so funny. I'm in technology too, and sometimes for customers, we have to give them estimates on how long, it's going to complete a task. And when I ask the engineers, they have best intentions in mind, but I always double what they say because there's
Yeah.
always going to be more. And
Yeah.
so like yourself, there's one, and then there's one I tell others, and then there's an actual one. Uh,
Yeah.
Even when I lost the weight, I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want, I didn't if I didn't make it, I didn't want, to kind of hear it. But it's very interesting what you have to do to kind of trick yourself and others. That's that's an interesting angle, and a lot of it's interesting how discipline plays a role in that. How so you decide. My goal with my triathlons was just to finish,
Yeah.
but at the end, the last two, I think I had 5 hours. I forget now, 4 hours, 5 hours, but and I actually beat it by 1 minute. It was crazy to
Wow.
think, but I did at the end start, start pushing goals like that. When you do that, when you have a goal in mind, do you train differently?
Uh, well, yeah, I mean, well, it's a good question. I mean, I think no, I would say for me, I don't, just because I tend to base my goal off of where I am. But I would say more that if I'm being very serious about reaching a certain goal, then I'll probably be a little more disciplined about my training. I
Mm,
mean, but it's I wouldn't. I mean, it's also very difficult when you start out, when when you're 16 weeks away, like, you don't really you can't it's very difficult for me to tell, "Okay, I'm gonna hit this goal." So, I tend to do it about 2, 3, 4 weeks before I set the goal, and then, I mean, yeah, I try to stay with the training, and that's really how I try to get there. But I'd say I think part of it is really just doing the workouts and doing them to the best of your ability. So yeah, I mean, you could say if you're really trying to reach your goal, you're going to have to really be, good about doing your training and doing it properly in proper form, and with at the intensity levels that you have to do them, and not just saying like, oh, tonight I'm tired, I'm not going to go for a run, but just, I love looking in Training Peaks. I send all my workouts to Training Peaks, and I
mhm,
love it when I see like all this green and it's like all the workouts are done, because the ones you don't do come up in red. And I love it when it's just like all green. Like,
mm.
that's my little gamification thing.
Yes, yeah, a little boost. When you were running in school, when you were a collegiate athlete,
Yeah.
did you was discipline part of routine as well then?
No, routine is like a word that didn't appear in my
Mm,
vocabulary probably until I became a mom.
right.
But I think the discipline there is totally different because you're running with a team. So, like,
Mm.
it's your job to turn up every day and to turn up in the right shape to run, right? So, I think college was pretty hard for me. I mean, I ended up, not getting a lot of sleep in college because I really ended up programming most nights, as a computer
Right.
science major. But so I probably wasn't in best form with every workout that I showed up for. But, I think you have a commitment to the team and you also want to make progress. You're investing so much time. I mean, we were training a lot of hours, right? So you do want to come in best form. But I think the discipline there is just showing up in shape and putting in your hardest work that day, right?
I'm gonna guess the language that you were programming in late at night. Given your age, I'm gonna say it was C.
It was just switching from C to C++. plus plus.
Ah,
So I
okay.
started college in 1997, yeah. But that was a pretty
Okay.
good guess. It was just
Yeah.
phasing out. We were just
It's
gonna C++.
just
plus plus.
phasing out. Yeah, yeah, C++
Yeah.
plus plus is very, very fast. Very yeah, I'm computer science major as well, and, I remember those nights. Um, Beverly Asante Pushman, what motivates you?
What motivates me? Wow. Well, there's a lot of things that motivate me, right? But I think, one thing that motivates me is I think when I can see people change their life for the better. And,
Mm,
whether that's in by making people realize something in their private life or even at work. I think sometimes you can have a conversation even at work where you talk to a mentee and it changes a perspective. And I think that's a little bit the same with what I love to do in my free time, talking to runners. And at lunchtime we sometimes talk about running. People ask me, oh, about your book and stuff like that. And I just love to have conversations with people that I feel have an impact on people, and see people you know uh, gain a different perspective on something, and seeing people reach goals and, yeah, do something new.
it's so wonderful that I know I do, and it seems like you do as well. I just do so much better when my friends are doing well. When I see
Yeah.
my friends and my loved ones doing well, and maybe I'm part of that success, maybe I'm not, but it's just when they do better, it just seems like we all do better together. It's just so rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, it is really rewarding to see people grow and flourish. And I think those moments that are just so precious are when you talk to somebody and they kind of have this light in their face because they've
Mm.
made this realization of, even just by having a conversation, they realized something maybe about themselves or about something that they'd been thinking about. Or I think those are the moments that are really just so wonderful, right? And I love it when I have conversations, or even for myself, sometimes I talk to somebody and I gain a new perspective, like, wow, I never thought about that,
Mm.
problem or thing in that way. And it's just so brilliant.
Yeah, we have to keep learning. It's the number one reason why I love talking to people like yourself. I mean,
Thank you.
who have a passion for running, who take it in so many different levels to write it. I mean, there are people who like running, and that's it. But what did you do? You're helping others do it. You wrote a book. You're promoting it, itself, and uh, that's what makes this conversation makes great, and was makes you great too. By the way, I might add. How do you measure
Thanks.
success?
How do I measure success? Wow, that's a really hard question. Yeah, that's it always, how do I measure success for myself or for other people? For myself, yeah.
Let's start both. Let's go both. Let's start with you.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think how do I measure success for myself? I mean, that's, I think a lot about how I want, for example, my son to grow up, or, how do I feel like I'm going to be a successful parent? Like for me, that's like if he grows up and is able to do what he wants to do, like enable him what he wants to do, right? And then when it comes to like running, I mean, I just tell myself, okay, well, look, I want to keep running and want to feel good. So like even for me, just feeling good, like if I don't make that time on that next race, like that's okay too. Like I set myself a goal to try and get
Hmm.
there, but if I don't meet it, that's okay. But it's I think success is also for me, I just want to have an impact on people's life, you know? And if I
Hmm.
can see that people's lives change and that they change for the better and that I'm able to change situations for the better and make something, tick better, or that's how I measure success for myself.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And when I heard your people reached out, and I started looking into you, started reading, and I said, "Well, this is going to be great. Here's somebody who has a passion for running. Instead of just doing it themselves, like you wrote a book, you're sharing your passion, and if we can help." Uh, others hear this message, get out and exercise. If it's running, share your passion with Beverly of running, whatever it may be, but just share it, and be better. Thank you so much for your time today, Beverly. This was great. How can we get your book? How can we get in touch with you if we wanted to?
Yeah, so to get the book, you can actually buy it on Amazon, but also a lot of other online bookstores. It's called Ace the Half. My name is Beverly Asante Puschmann, spelled the German way.
Right.
So that's how you can find it. And my website is ilovetorunnandrace.com. And you can also find a link to the book there. And the other place you can find me is on the Facebook page, which is www.facebook.com/ I love to run and race. So you can find me there too.
I love to run a race. Yeah, Ace the Half
Ace
Marathon.
the half.
And on your website, I encourage everybody to take that quiz. You give a great response. You go through, you get an email. You give a great video response as your score, and you do a really great job there. You got great content, Beverly. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope if I get out there to see my cousins in southern Switzerland, I go north, and maybe we can have well, I guess we coffee in Zurich, but hot chocolate. I always think of chocolate when I think
Oh, we
Swiss.
have a great place to have hot chocolate. I'll
Yeah,
take you
of
to
course.
this really good place.
Of course. Yes. Beverly, thank you so much. You be well.
Thank you very much, Joey. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you for listening and/or viewing Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources, and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media: Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information: the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations.